morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Glad you're riding with us this morning. Thank you. You know, we're gonna hit on a few different topics this morning that are of specific importance. You know, as we close out the year, there's a few things that we want to try to remember, I guess. And I'm not going to make this one of these let's wrap up the year in news and all that nonsense, because frankly, we already know what that news was. It wasn't good. We've looked at a significant series of abuses that have gone on this year that would, frankly, 5 years ago, most Americans would have never believed where we are right now was possible. And so let's be cognizant of the fact that, we've got this really sinister, if you will, year that's gone down, and it has really changed everything about the way Americans need to, one, look at ourselves and look at our nation. But in addition to that, the way that we have to effectively move forward, right? We can't just recognize that there's a problem and then refuse to do something about it. So there's a couple of topics I want to talk about this morning. The first topic is going to be the rise of the police state in the United States. Police state tactics are being employed over and over and over again on American citizens, but they're being deployed, at least at this stage in the game, almost with impunity. And I'm going to give you one or two examples of that, not the least of which was those folks down there in New Mexico, and another story that I'll be talking about this morning, which was a police officer or a group of police officers who were charged and eventually brought to justice based on some abuse that they had, they were, well, I'll get into it. I mean, these guys were actually raping suspects with their hands. I mean, it's beyond comprehension. This guy got 2 years in prison for over 25 incidences. That's what they know of. And the police department was unconscionable enough to say they had to run a couple of years for investigations in order to determine how to deal with it. I got to tell you, how many people were raped at this guy's hands while they sat there and said, well, we're just we have to wait a couple of years for the investigations to take place. Ladies and gentlemen, that's inconceivable to me. Our second issue is we constantly hear about tolerance and about how we need to have equality and so forth and so on. Yet our second topic is going to talk about how the Democratic Party pays blacks and Hispanics less than they pay their white counterparts who work for the party. Really? So you're going to try and tell me that the party who's out there screaming for equality and we need to strip the money from the rich and give to the poor and blah, 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 and how downtrodden the blacks are and the Hispanics are and how we need immigration to allow everybody into the country so everybody has a fair shot, and they're the ones who are actually paying less. I want to talk about the intolerance of those people who say, you must show me tolerance, but I must show you none. Our third topic, reading boosts your brain. Why do we say that? Well, there's a study out that talks about it, and we're gonna get into that. I want to encourage you to make New Year's resolutions this year, but they have to be resolutions that have meaning and substance, and are not, well, I'm going to go work out. I'm going to drop 12 pounds. Forget all that nonsense. Why don't you try exercising the one muscle that you have that actually matters? Your brain. We're going to talk a little bit about reading and what that does for you when we get to that third topic. Our fourth topic, critical thinking exercise. This is directly after our third topic because it's relevant. The other day, Saturday, the New York Times put out an article called The Deadly Mix in Benghazi. And what they attempted to do was to change and whitewash the truth about what we know about Benghazi. Now, they say they've done their own investigation. The headline is, New Bombshell Report on Benghazi Finds No Evidence Al-Qaeda Was Involved. Really? Well, again, the New York Times with the fairy tales, powered by unicorn flatulence and farts. The truth is, a congressional study has been done, numbers of them. They have actually had testimony from the witnesses who were there. This was conducted with, and by the way, these witnesses were the ones who were withheld. Their names were changed. They were shifted around and moved around like they were participants in, a witness protection program. And all of those people tell a vastly different tale. The New York Times is trying to make you believe that the movie that they originally claimed all this was about was in fact the real motivator for this attack. We know it wasn't. We know it was a gun-running deal gone bad. Another one. No, not Fast and Furious. This was Benghazi Fast and Furious. The New York Times story is a gross example of the use of legal propaganda that I told you about months ago when the government passed a change in the law that allows them to legally use propaganda against American citizens. I told you then that you would never be able to tell fact from fiction in the media again. And you know what? I was right. And I'm going to prove it to you. You're going to see a perfect real-world example of exactly what we were talking about. All right, let's get into our first topic. There was an article in the Daily Caller. Their headline is, Unbelievably Lenient Sentence for a Cop Who Fingered Suspects' Anuses. They started out by telling you at the end of 2013, it's brought a measure of closure to a long-running Milwaukee police scandal. Now, this wasn't a cop who acted alone. He had participants and players with him. They repeatedly, and illegally obviously, inserted their fingers into black male suspects' anal cavities. This guy, after years of investigation and dozens of testimonies, he got off with, wait till you hear this, folks, a 2-year sentence. 2 years. 2 years for rape. And mark my words, this was rape. They did this in some instances at the point of a gun. In one case, a 15-year-old. One victim said that another officer put a gun to his head while Vagnini, he's the cop who did this, administered a chokehold, touched his, this is radio, so I got to be a little bit sensitive. I guess this is printed, so touched his scrotum and fingered his anus, and another man was probed so violently that he bled on the street. This wasn't a medical probe, folks. This wasn't, okay, we're going to take this guy over to Hospital XYZ like we saw over in New Mexico, which is just another example. I mean, if you didn't remember hearing the story I did on New Mexico, this is an example where there were multiple, like 8 people in New Mexico who were pulled over by law enforcement, taken to a hospital because, according to the police officer, they were suspicious. And this one guy was actually probed 8 separate times, including CAT scans, X-rays, digital probes, and liquid. You know what they found? Nothing. You know what they did? They turned around and sent the guy a $6,000 bill for the hospital service. Because the cop said he looked like he was clenching his buttocks and he was suspicious. There was a woman, the same exact thing. In fact, they went to the degrading point to watch this woman defecate in a toilet to prove. I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, this is inconceivable behavior on the part of law enforcement. If you will tolerate this, you will tolerate anything. The article says, Wisconsin law abjectly prohibits police officers from administering cavity searches. Only medical professionals. You know what? We don't need a law to tell us that. No warrant, no medical degree. The guy didn't even wear gloves. There were at least a dozen other instances of this guy, Vagnini, performing these invasive and illegal searches, all on black men. According to his police reports on every one of these, some of them were actually carrying drugs. The guys contend that the cop lied and even planted the drugs while he was doing the search. Hey, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Any cop that would do that, I have no doubt that he would plant dope too. This one guy was searched by Milwaukee police on 4 separate occasions. No drugs were found any of the 4 times. He didn't use gloves, or rarely used gloves, they say. He stole their personal stuff, and he laughed when he was asked to present a warrant. Milwaukee Police Chief Ed Flynn, according to this article, and I don't believe it, gradually became aware. Gradually? But he had to wait, and this is his quote, a couple of years for a proper investigation to take place. Are you kidding me? You've got to wait a couple of years while men are being raped in the street by one of your officers. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so incensed by this story and numerous other stories I've given to you over time. The examples I've given you of what happened down in New Mexico and what's been happening in Texas, what's been happening across the country. Unconscionable behavior. With all due respect, let me tell you something. I don't do drugs. I don't particularly like them. I don't think anybody should do them. But that's your choice. It's your business. You want to ruin your life, you want to ruin your mind, you go ahead and do that. But nothing, and I mean nothing, warrants this level of abuse. There is nothing that justifies this behavior. This cop didn't act alone. He was the ringleader. He did a plea deal. He got a little over 2 years in jail. In his plea deal, he pled guilty to 4 felony and 4 misdemeanor charges. The sexual assault charges were voided out. So he doesn't have to, what? Register as a sex offender. Are you flipping kidding me? You're going to tell me this guy abused 25 people and he doesn't have to register as a sex offender. But an 18-year-old boy who's got a picture of his 16-year-old girlfriend snapping a photo underneath her shirt with her iPhone and emailing it to him has to be registered as a sex offender for life. I'm telling you, this country is so far upside down, so far gone. Everything that we have known, believed in, trusted, it is all gone, ladies and gentlemen. I've got to tell you, I'm so incensed when I see things like this going on, and I see America asleep at the switch. This guy didn't act alone. There were 4 other cops who acted with him in concert and assisted him. Their names were Jacob Knight, Jeffrey Dolhopf, Brian Kozolak, and Jason Murcha. They assisted this guy by holding down the victims, and or they turned a blind eye and failed to report. Now, I got to tell you, anybody who would have held down a victim while this guy did this, there is no, that individual should not be safe. I tell you what, when Vagnini gets to jail, the only hope I have is that the boys in the box know exactly what to do with a guy like Vagnini. I'm praying he doesn't get out after his 2 years. And by the way, if he got 2 years on a state beef, let me tell you what he's going to do. If this piece of garbage does 6 or 8 months, that'd be a lot. He'll get preferential treatment in there because he's a cop. He'll get protection because he's a cop. He'll get isolation in a secured place because he's a cop. Now, the 4 other guys were all sentenced for their crimes. You know what they got? Community service and some fines in the manner of a few $100. They were forced to quit, but they got paid leave for months while the investigation went on. Forced to quit? You know what that means? That means they got their pensions. That means they can leave with an honorable. That means that they can go work in another police department somewhere, another police force. That means they can work in the security industry. That means they can carry a weapon. I'm telling you right now, not a one of these scums ought to be able to carry a weapon. You talk about people being barred from firearms ownership under their Second Amendment rights for something like being caught when they were 17, 18, 19, 20, 22 with a bag of weed. And here they are 40, 50, 55, 60 years old, and they've got a job and a home, and they've never had more than a traffic ticket after that, and they're barred from the ownership of weapons. And these pieces of trash are unable to stroll the streets with their heads held high, their rights intact. And I am mad as hell. This piece of garbage, Vagnini, his lawyer actually defended his client, stating that the officer's tactics were encouraged by the department as a way to catch and deter drug offenders. So, in other words, the word on the street should spread. Because once these people are searched this way, they'll go out and they'll tell all their friends, and it's supposed to deter drug activity. The New Mexico police have been randomly pulling people over and doing the same thing, escorting them to a hospital. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't care what drug you take. I don't care what you do. I don't care how screwed up you want to make your life. You know, here's the reality of this thing. If you were to sit there and say to me, these officers did this because they were concerned about some kind of a law enforcement issue for their safety, they had to search the guy for a weapon. I can understand a physical search when you pull someone over or you find them on the street, a pat-down search, because there's no way you're hiding a firearm in there or a knife in there. I got to tell you, this is so above and beyond the call of, you see, you know, the other day I said to you, you should have one resolution for 2014, and there's a second one, but we're gonna talk about that later. The one that really matters, and the second one will actually help you to further the first one. There is one primary resolution you must make this year before we move into 2014. And it should be absolute, 100%, total and abject resistance. Resistance against tyranny, treason, this kind of abuse. This police chief should be in jail with the perpetrator, Vagnini. If this was department policy, if this guy took 2 years to investigate this man's actions, he furthered and committed the crime with him. Crimes. Plural. And if we only know about 25 cases, how many were there really? How many people were too embarrassed to come forward? How many people did he set up? Any guy that would treat the law the way this guy does, clearly I have no problem with believing that he might actually implant the drugs himself. If his belief of the law, I want you to go to the image, and I want you to go to the story. I'm going to link it in this YouTube box here. I want you to go and look and see what this piece of garbage looks like. There's a picture of his face in there. And then, every one of us should be on the phone to the Milwaukee Police Department and get a hold of the chief over there and tell him that you're aware of what he did. His name is Ed Flynn. Chief Ed Flynn. I would like to see this guy's voicemail jammed so deep, I would like to see him do nothing but answer telephone calls from people outraged at his behavior. I would like to see the citizens of Milwaukee drag this guy out and pillory him on a rail. The chief of a police department is not an elected official. He works at the behest and at the pleasure of the city. The city of Milwaukee should have this guy tarred and feathered, literally and or figuratively, for this activity. How can a law enforcement department sit there and claim that they have the moral high ground when they've got monsters like this working for them? How can law enforcement in the state of New Mexico, how can law enforcement in the state of Texas, how can law enforcement across the country, how can law enforcement in the state of Missouri claim to have the moral high ground, claim to be representing and protecting and defending the people, when they are abusing them like this? Ladies and gentlemen, you cannot support and defend this kind of behavior. It's inexcusable. You cannot defend the indefensible. Nothing warrants this. And nothing that police can say they do makes up for it. Not a thing. You've been listening to America's Voice Now. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we're going to tackle this next topic, another hypocritical betrayal. Democratic campaigns pay African American blacks, they're not African Americans, they're blacks, and Hispanics less than they pay their white counterparts. You got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. No, I'm not. It's true. All right. Find us on the web at americasvoicenow.org, facebook.com/americasvoicenow, youtube.com/americasvoicenow, patriotfb.com, where we stream this show live every morning. Oh, man. Spreaker.com/user/America's Voice Now. We'll be right back. All right. We return. Man, am I stoked this morning. These stories about law enforcement abuse. And you know what? I remember a time when it used to say on the side of their car, to protect and serve. You don't hear that anymore. You don't hear them called peace officers anymore. Now you hear them called law enforcement. Well, with all due respect, it was our founders who said to us that when the laws become so convoluted and so voluminous, when they change so frequently that one cannot maintain a conscious understanding of what they are, you live under tyranny. Ladies and gentlemen, if it's not apparent to you by now that we are living in a state of tyranny, government-sponsored terrorism, I'm not sure what more you're waiting for. I mean, the evidence is all around you. I want to cover a couple of housekeeping things. First and foremost, I want you to get over to patriotfb.com. That is a website where it's kind of like a Facebook clone. But the wonderful part about it is when you are on Patriot FB, you're only meeting up with individuals who are patriots, number one. They're very careful about who they... I mean, anyone can join, but they do a little bit of checking to make sure that you're legit. Two, there are a series and a host of radio programs that are on there. I'm on it from 8 to 10 a.m. Central. After me, Conservative Junction comes on air with J.J. McCartney. Excellent show. The Midnight Patriot with Jeff is on from 9 p.m. till 12 a.m. midnight. And Restoring America Radio is on 24 hours a day. We're planning on working with this... There's Cowboy Radio, too. There's a couple of other stations on here. I'll pull up the list for you. What I'm telling you is this. You can get on here and you can stream these radio programs all day long. You want great content? You want great patriots who are telling you the truth, who are not lying to you, who are not misrepresenting what's going on in our nation? This is where you turn to. Because I'm telling you right now, in this story, the story that we're going to talk about at the end of the show, where the Benghazi, the New York Times came out with a Benghazi article that tries to whitewash everything that's gone down with Benghazi and trying to tell us that, again, the video was the responsible reason for it. Let me tell you something, folks. A couple of months ago, I did a story about the fact that through the Federal Register, the government obviated a bill called the Smith-Mundt Amendment that was passed in 1940, or Smith-Mundt Act, that was passed in 1947. And in that act, they barred the United States of America, the government itself, from utilizing propaganda as an acknowledged medium or method within the domestic United States to influence and alter and modify and indoctrinate American citizens. And they did it for a very good reason. They know the power of manipulation that can be done through propaganda. They secretly and quietly lifted it. Most Americans had no idea. Most Americans still don't know. Go look up Smith-Mundt Act. Or go follow the story that I posted up on our Facebook, YouTube, and Patriot FB pages and all the rest of them. The one where I did a story, and WorldNet Daily picked it up. They actually wrote an article around it and then incorporated the entire half-hour video segment in the story. Go listen to it. Go read it. Go learn and educate yourself. You are being flooded with propaganda. And the only way to get around that is to find and work with individuals and get your news from sources that are alternative media, just like America's Voice Now, just like Conservative Junction Radio, just like Midnight Patriot, just like Cowboy. Listen, folks, the point is this. If you are getting your media and your information from mainstream media, you're being played. You're being played by like you're a sucker on the street. Everything that you know, everything that you see, everything that you do is influenced, modified, and manipulated. Nothing is pure, nothing is righteous, nothing is straight in the media. Tomorrow I'm going to talk to you about the Council on Foreign Relations. I'm going to spend some time on it. And then that's going to be our last show for the year. Because I want you to recognize how dangerous this kind of activity is. They're putting forth their own guy named Stanley Fisher for the number 2 spot at the Fed. Well, let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to know who really runs the world, look at the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR. A lot of people are going to sit there and say, right now, I don't know who the CFR is. They are the most insidious and treacherous global New World Order organization that exists on the planet today. Their members and their corporate sponsors own and run every major corporation, media outlet, every department of state, every central bank, every international organization, every environmental group, all the extra-constitutional administrative agencies. They have run and maintained members in every cabinet and every president since Roosevelt, with the exception of Ronald Reagan and this particular trash box we have in office right now. Every military contractor, every major and minor bank, every international and domestic conglomerate, all the data companies, all news media, including print, television, and all the major market radio stations, every education publisher, every university, and every college, all of the lobbying firms, most nonprofit foundations, and all influential entities that exist, including the largest churches in the nation, as well as all of those large churches' headquarters associations. They have infiltrated every national policy organization, every medical association, all the chambers of commerce. State, national, doesn't make any difference. They control everything that you see, everything you hear, read, think, watch, ingest, smell, taste, eat, and feel. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the true enemy of America and the world. That is the father, the parent of corporatism. I'm going to talk about it extensively tomorrow, and I'm telling you right now, you better get your head strapped around this one, because this group is danger, exigent danger. They are a clear and present exigent danger to the United States of America. And if you don't know who they are, I gave you there in this posting on Facebook, and I might even just repeat it for tomorrow just so it's easy for you to find. But I posted it yesterday. It is go read the roster of the membership. It's like a who's who of everybody you've ever heard of in every one of these organizations. Every government entity, every agency, every media outlet, every organization, everyone. It's huge. You want to talk about a grand conspiracy? That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Find out, do your homework, educate yourself. What is the CFR? And know the truth. The truth is, you are being led. And everything that you hear, everything that you ingest, mentally, physically, orally through your ears, orally through your mouth, all of it is designed to do one thing: manipulate you and modify your action and behavior. That's what this is all about. Behavior modification. Now, you hear about these people railing against how heartless and cruel the conservatives in this country are, because they want to hold down blacks. And they hate immigrants, and they hate babies and grandparents. Well, let me tell you something. The Democratic Party pays their black and Hispanic staffers 70 cents on the dollar compared to their white counterparts. Ask the blacks, have they fared better under Obama? If you get a true, honest answer, the answer will be no. Have they seen an increase in their revenue? Have they seen an increase in their income? Have they seen an increase in their rights? Equality, diversity? No. You've got a couple of groups out there, like the gays and the lesbians and the LGBTs or whatever, that have, for whatever reason, I don't know how such a tiny minority seems to have infected the national discourse like a virus. And listen, I'm not saying something against negative about gays and lesbians. Listen, I don't care who you sleep with. It's none of my business. I don't really care. I just don't want it shoved down my throat. I don't want to be forced to acknowledge and approve of what you do, because maybe I don't. But it doesn't matter, because that's my right to approve or disapprove. I don't owe you an explanation for what I think. You don't owe me an explanation for what you do. But I don't owe you an explanation for what I think and how I feel about it. This is the party of diversity, allegedly, the Democrats, the liberals, the progressives. But have you ever noticed that it's tolerant demands for them? But the minute that they have the slightest ounce of power, everyone around them has their rights stripped away. You know what? This reminds me of the Muslims, because their attitude is, when you're here in this country, we demand tolerance for our beliefs. But go to any Islamic country and spend 8 minutes there and see how tolerant they are of you. They demand tolerance when they're in the minority. But as soon as they have either a majority or the law on their side, based on their screaming and their yelling and their histrionics, there's no tolerance for anyone else. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not diversity. That's hypocrisy. And they have done an extraordinarily valuable job from their perspective of tripping up the entire population of minorities in this country. And I don't care whether you're a minority of women, a minority of black, a minority of Hispanic, a minority of gay, a minority of lesbian, a minority of whatever you are. These people all believe that they are getting the benefit of the liberal progressive mindset. Let me tell you something. It's a pretty well-known fact at this point, and if you don't believe me, go do your own homework. I'm not going to try to give you some reasons why you should believe me. I don't even want you to. I do always want you to take what I say as my opinion, and then you go out and formulate your own, but never repeat and parrot mine. But it's a well-known fact that the fascist regime in Germany utilized minorities to accomplish their goals. And the minute that those minorities had outlived their usefulness, they were slaughtered or they were embedded in camps and eventually slaughtered. I mean, the end result is, if you don't by now recognize that you as a minority, in whatever minority situation you find yourself in, if you believe that by forcing others to modify their behavior to meet your needs, and that you have that power, and it won't turn around and karmically bite you in the rear end at the end, you're mistaken. I'm telling you, you're mistaken. The reason is because the people that you're counting on to give you that power to achieve your own personal end, your bias, and to force everyone else to abide by it, those people are willing to let you operate in your delusion until such time as you've outlived your usefulness. And then you will be removed without a moment's hesitation. Unemployment in the black community is higher than it has ever been historically. Same in the Hispanic population. The levels of abuse, and I got to tell you something. You know, that article the story I just did about the unbelievable abuse of these people that were strip searched and sexually violated by that officer. Guess what? They were all black. The truth is, and you know, you'll hear the number that the numbers of people in prison, and the number of blacks that are charged with crime. Hey, you're absolutely right. The prisons are loaded with black men, far more so than white men and women. I don't deny it. But look who's in charge in every major city in the country. Look at the political party that owns those police departments. Don't you recognize the fact that every one of those police departments has a policy in place that starts at the top? And all police chiefs work at the pleasure of the city. They're not an elected official like a sheriff. You're starting to get a glimpse. You see, what really happens is fish always stink from the head to the tail. I mean, you can't say that the tail smells, but the head doesn't. And you can see that as a microcosm, just like you can see it where the Obama administration has geared and directed every administrative agency beneath it to utilize their bias to institute tyranny on you. Institutionalized, government-sponsored terrorism on the American people. And the cops are just way, way, way down the chain, hitting you individually. Groups like the IRS and the EPA, they're doing it to the entire nation. The NSA, the entire nation. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, look at what's going on around you and recognize look, our country is literally at this stage about to implode. It's going to implode because we are now living in a situation where the police state mentality of this country has reached a point, and the intolerance in this country, the lack of diversity, which is screamed about. Well, did you ever hear the old phrase, the guy who screams the loudest is usually guilty of whatever it is he's screaming about? Don't you see what's happening here? Look at people like Jackson and Sharpton. They're guilty of exactly what they scream and bloody murder about. And when it happens on the other side, you never see them come forward and say, wow, look at this injustice. Thou dost protesteth too much. The truth is, the only diversity here, the only liberality here, is a temporary measure to get these divergent groups to work towards achieving the end of government's intended goals. And when their usefulness has expired, they will too. I mean, these people who vote for, and not, I don't mean vote in an election type of vote, but the people who stand here and scream that we should have tolerance for Islam, who also simultaneously scream we should have tolerance for gays, go and be gay in a Muslim country and see how long you last. If we ever get Sharia law here, and trust me, that's part of the game, let me tell you something. They're going to be the first ones to be rounded up and slaughtered. Why someone would argue in favor of their own demise is completely beyond my comprehension. Naivete is not a virtue, ladies and gentlemen. Pretending that it is doesn't make it so. All right, I want to touch on a couple things. First of all, and this is good news, very good news. America's Voice Now. Yesterday, I worked with a new group called Audio Now, and they will be providing us with a dial-in listen line. Now, I know I've had many folks ask me about this over time. The listen line is basically a telephone number that you can dial in from 1 to 10,000. And there's no charge to you to use this service. So if you're on a cell phone, I've heard many people say to me, well, the problem with downloading a podcast is that it uses up all my data, and I don't have enough data to then be able to do the other things I have to do, or it's a work phone and I can't use that data. Okay, here's the solution. You'll be able to listen to America's Voice by phone. There's no extra call for the cost for the call. It uses your mobile minutes, which are on almost every cell phone unlimited. So you'll be able to literally dial in to a phone number, which they'll be appointing us this week, or assigning us this week. And it doesn't matter whether you're from home or whether you are on your mobile. It doesn't matter whether you're at your office phone. You can plop on a headset maybe and just listen to the show that way. If you have low bandwidth or you're living in a rural area, if you're outside of our broadcast area and you can't get to a PC, this is the perfect solution for you. It's totally free to you, and AudioNow.com is the company that's going to sponsor this for us. I am so pleased. If you knew how long I've been trying to put this thing together, you'd be as ecstatic and happy about it as I am. So I would like for you to remember that over the course of the next couple days, I'm going to start giving this number out. I want you to write it down. And I want you to share it with people because it's a way for them to catch the show live without actually having to have a radio or a computer in front of them. They can simply use a phone. And it doesn't use data, it just uses your mobile minutes. I'm going to talk to the folks over at Patriot FB and look and see whether or not this makes sense for us to have for all of the radio hosts, because there's just a nonstop day stream of radio hosts. I mean, theoretically, you're on unlimited mobile minutes, right? So you could dial into that and stay on there for 4 or 5 hours. You may as well get your money's worth, folks. All right, I'd like you to make sure that you contact and support our sponsors. I'd like you to make sure that you let them know that you heard about them on America's Voice Now. The Battery Station is one of our larger sponsors. They've been with us for years. They're a great group of people. They're located at 303 Washington Avenue in West Plains. Their zip code is 65775. Telephone number is 417-257-7799. And their website is batterystation.com. That's batterystation.com. Now, the point of the Battery Station is that they, it sounds like they only sell batteries. Well, they're one of the largest distributors of batteries in the nation. So if you have a business that you need batteries, let me tell you, there's not a battery that Kevin doesn't have. They ship nationwide. In fact, they ship globally. They are one of the largest distributors of batteries in the country to law enforcement, fire departments, and things like that. So they work with a lot of emergency services organizations. They actually have government contracts. They ship over to our military, to our guys overseas. So if you're in the market for a battery or a flashlight of any sort, any kind of a product that uses batteries, they've got cell phone batteries as well, give them a call. But they also carry things like ammunition and tactical gear and freeze-dried food. And, I mean, the list is just endless. They've got optics in there and accessories for weaponry. When you get into that store, you'll be amazed at how much stuff they pack into it. I mean, it's really amazing. Anyway, go see them. That's the Battery Station, 303 Washington Avenue in West Plains, 417-257-7799, and batterystation.com. You can email them at info@batterystation.com. If you want to help them in their drive to support the troops this fall, please make sure that you do that. They send stuff over to our troops overseas. They need help and funding to accomplish that task, and it's ongoing right now. The other group I'd like you to support is our friends over at the Patriot Tobacco Shop. They're right on the square in West Plains. Right behind Wits End Classic Barbershop, Jason's barbershop there. Jason cuts my hair, charges $10 for a haircut, folks. Can't beat that with a lead pipe. And in addition to that, he does, I mean, it's like stepping into a barbershop from the 50s when you go in there. There's literally, it's just like, what we would have expected in the olden days. It's a step back in time. Great place. Great conversation with other folks waiting in there to get their hairs cut and so forth. It's Wits End Classic Barbershop, right on the square in West Plains. Right behind there, you can just go straight through the barbershop and into the back door, or in through the door into the tobacco shop in the back. And they've got great Christmas gifts. So if you need a belated Christmas gift for someone, perfect opportunity for you. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, we're going to tackle our third subject, how reading boosts your brain. And I want to encourage you, this is one of the two New Year resolutions that I think every American should be making. One is to plan and work on total resistance, and the second one is how to improve your thinking. We'll be back in just a moment.
It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'll be your host this morning. We're in our third segment. This is the 30th of December, one day short of New Year's Eve. I got to tell you, I think for most folks, and me included, 2013 was an awful year. It's an awful year for our nation. I think most Americans experienced, a lot of difficulty in terms of jobs and income and being able to afford, the increase of inflation and things. And, that's not... I'm kind of glad 2013 is going the way of the buffalo, frankly. It's a year I can't wait to see end. But, one of the things that we hear constantly from folks is that I'm going to set a resolution for the new year. I've got these plans. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And I got to tell you, I'm not a big person to make resolutions. I don't, personally. I don't make any. Because I don't think they, if you're a person who needs to make a resolution to do something and you wait until January 1st to do it, I can almost guarantee you that you will not accomplish what you set out to do. It's just the nature of what it is. If you're the kind of person that feels like you've got to, make a new resolution for the year, it's almost invariably true that you will not accomplish whatever that task was that you set for yourself. It's just reality. There are two things, though, that I would like you to put your efforts towards this year. Make a cognizant, well-reasoned, thoughtful effort to accomplish. There are two things. The first is, I want you to change your lifestyle. And this is big. This is bigger than I'm going to go to a gym every day. I'm going to drop 20 pounds. I'm going to quit smoking. I'm going to, quit drinking. I'm going to quit, eating bananas, whatever the heck it is your thing is. But this is big. Because it will change your lifestyle, and it will change your life, and it will change the outcome of how things move in your life. And that is one single word. Resistance. Resistance. We are reaching a point in time in which it's actually appropriate to begin thinking in partisan terms. What do I mean by that? No, I'm not advocating that you run out there and become violent. I don't advocate that at all. And those of you who listen to this program on a routine basis, you know that I advocate peaceful civil disobedience. But resistance is resistance nonetheless, and there's many, many ways in which you can accomplish that task without being violent. You can opt out of Obamacare if you haven't already. Well, in fact, if you haven't signed up by now, you've already accomplished your first step in resistance. But there are many other things that you can do to resist. And I'd like you to sit down before the end of the year sometime and just grab a pen and a pad. I advocate, and I've said it, you've heard me say it many times, get one of those little spiral-bound notebooks that you can carry in a pocket with you so you can take a note about when you think about something that strikes you or affects you in some way, or a note that you want to remind yourself to do something, or whatever the case may be. Because as we get older, we have so many things crowding in for our attention, it's hard to keep track of them all. And so carrying that little notebook is an extraordinarily valuable tool to you, or it should be. And I'd like you to take some notes about ways that you can be resistant. And you can be a player in the resistance against what we see going on in our country. We're going into an election year, and I want you to resist the urge to vote for the lesser of two evils. How? Well, I want you to actually run for office. If you're listening to this program on a routine basis, you're qualified. I want you to go in there with the right attitude, the right spirit, the right motivation, the right intentions, and I want you to pledge, not just to yourself, but to others, that you will only serve a single term. You're only going to go in and do a short term of duty, a tour of duty, if you will, and then go home and go back to being a baker or a shoemaker or a candlestick maker or whatever the heck you did before. Because you stay too long and you will never leave. What was that old English classic, literature classic, where the guys were, called by the sirens on the, I think it was out of the Odyssey, where they were lured by the sirens singing to them on the ship, and they went to the island, and when they got in there, the sirens lured them and lulled them into staying, and time stopped, and thousands of years could go by, and you'd never know it. Don't be lulled. Don't be lured in by the political realm. Get in there, do your duty. I advocate that you get into the position, and that, like a crusader of old, forget all the religious connotations, just think of a warrior. You pull out that massive double-edged sword, that huge sword, and you begin to hew and hack away at the beast that has swallowed you. And you begin to hack away at it from the inside, because that's where its soft underbelly is accessible to you. I would like to see people run for office whose only commitment is to repealing laws. Tens of thousands of them that exist out there. If you haven't read any of the news that's going on, this January, we're about to have 4,000 some odd new rules and regulations and land on us. That's federal alone, folks. We're not even talking about state and city. I mean, the number is so astronomical. There's no way a human being can follow them all. And they know that. That's the goal. That's the intent. Keep you confused, keep you rocked, keep you off your balance. There's no way that you can possibly contend with all of it. But one of the things that, outside of resistance, that you can do, which will boost your ability to accomplish that task, is outlined in an article that I found in the Independent, which is a UK paper. And here's the headline: brain function boosted for days after reading a novel. Reading a gripping novel causes a biological change in the brain, which lasts for days. This is a study that was done by Emory University in the United States here. And they found that being drawn into a gripping novel can actually trigger measurable changes in the brain that linger on for days after reading it. It causes heightened connectivity by the sensors in the brain and neurological changes that affect you and persist in ways that are very similar to muscle memory. Now, when I was a tactical trainer and I used to teach people how to shoot, I would say, look, when you draw the weapon, you do it this way, you punch out, and you follow these same motions over and over and over until they become muscle memory, until you do it without thinking. That the motion here and the motion there and the movement of your head and the way in which you grip and the way in which you stand, those things, if practiced often enough and frequently enough, become second nature. So when a crisis occurs, you don't have to think, you just act. Anyone who's ever been in the military will know the same thing. Your brain is no different than the muscles in your arms and your legs and in your back and in your neck. Muscle memory is perhaps one of the most valuable assets that we as physiological beings have. But the one muscle that everybody is ignoring is their brain. And mark my words, it is a muscle. What these guys found is that when you read a novel that actually is engaging, that you actually kind of take on the persona of the protagonist. Now, the protagonist, for those of you who don't read, is the guy that's the hero, right? Not the antagonist is the bad guy. And by the way, let's just talk about a couple of the quick benefits that you get from reading, including language. I mean, your ability to articulate your thoughts will dramatically improve. Your ability to take complex situations and break them down so that you can express and articulate highly complex issues and explain it to other people who don't have that insight or that understanding or the mental capacity or the experience even to grasp those concepts, you'll be able to dramatically improve that power within yourself. And I am going to tell you something. There is no greater influential power than communication. Your ability to communicate your beliefs, your thoughts, your ideas, and your feelings into words is unparalleled. It is the one thing that separates us from the animal kingdom. Your ability to communicate will dramatically improve. Your ability to understand what you're reading and what you're seeing will dramatically improve. Your ability to spell, to string words together in a sentence that is well-reasoned and articulate. You'll use the right words at the right time in the right place. But better than that, you will create pathways, neurological pathways in your mind that give you the ability to think in a brand new fashion, in a critically thinking fashion, to weigh this versus that, to understand the benefit that this provides over that, to look at things in an objective format, to look at the pros and the cons, and then weigh your options. Those are just like the muscle that grows and is strengthened in your arm. Those neural changes are extraordinarily valuable to you as an individual. They actually registered in the left temporal cortex of the brain. This is the area of the brain that is known for the receptivity in language as well as sensory motor action, right? And the neurons in this region are the ones that are motivated and activated by reading. And I mean, you can actually trick your brain into thinking that you're doing something that it's not doing. They actually have a name for it. It's called grounded cognition. So just by thinking about running, you can activate the neurons in your mind that say, okay, left leg, arm pump, right? You can think about an action and take that action in your mind without actually physically accomplishing it. But what you are doing is you're exercising your mind. Here's the quote from one of the researchers that did it. The neural changes that we found associated with physical sensation and movement systems, suggest that reading a novel can transport you into the body of the protagonist. We already know that good stories can put you in someone else's shoes in a figurative sense. Now we're seeing that something may also be happening to you biologically. Now, they used a thriller called Pompeii to do this study, and they used 21 students in this study. And this book, Pompeii, it's a thriller that was written back in early 2000s. And the story follows a protagonist who's outside the city of Pompeii, and this is, Pompeii, the city in Italy, which was completely buried under ash during an explosion or a volcanic explosion, right? And they notice the steam and strange things happening around the volcano and so forth and so on. It depicts these true events that we know happened, but in a fictional and dramatic way, obviously, because nobody that's alive now was really there. Anyway, the book has a very, very strong narrative line, and it's well known as like this page ripper. If you're a reader, you know what I'm talking about, right? This is the one where you're like, I don't care if it's 1 o'clock in the morning and I got to get up. I'm going to finish this book. I can't tell you how many nights I've done that. Anyway, over the course of about 3 weeks, these students read portions of the book in the evening, and then they had these MRI scans the following day, and so forth and so on. Once the book was done, their brains were scanned for 5 days after the testing. The changes that were exhibited were actually found to have continued for a period of up to 5 days after they finished the book. So the influence of this is not just something that just transpires and it's over in a day. It continued on in their lives. And these participants were, amazed at the changes that occurred in their way of thinking. But more importantly, the value of reading, and I understand it. I speak to people all the time and say, look, I can't read a book about politics or whatever. It's just, it's like reading a math book. It just puts me to sleep. I get that. But this isn't suggesting that you read a dry, book about statistical analysis or something. This is talking about reading a novel, an action novel. In fact, they specifically did this test and study around an action novel and a thought-provoking one where you are using your imagination. When I was a kid, my brother and I, typical boys, we busted our television set. We snapped the knob off that turned it on and off. That was when you actually had to pull it out and turn the knob to get the power up and to the volume up. We broke it. My parents said, we're not fixing it. And we said, okay, well, how long? And they said, no, you're not getting the point. We're not going to fix the television. There will no longer be a television in this house. I was probably 7 or 8 when that happened, and we didn't have a television until I was probably 18, just before I left home. And I began to read. I reiterated this in a show I did about a week or so ago. I had a 4th grade teacher who forced me to do a book report after I tried to ham-handedly copy it off the inside jacket covers, as most kids will do. And he caught me at it. And he forced me to read this book, and he said, now you're going to tell me everything that happened in every chapter so I can verify that you actually read the book. And I became stunned at what I found when I read this book. And I'm not talking about, Dick and Jane and, see Dick run and blah, blah, blah. I'm talking about real reading. A narrative novel. Well, it wasn't long before I read anything and everything I could get my hands on, and it made no difference what it was. I read everything from westerns to science fiction to philosophy. I've got the Bret Hart series. I've got the 5-foot wall of books. I read anything I could get my hands on. I carried a book in my pocket. Everywhere I went, I had a book. And I read and read and read and read and read. Listen, I have no formal education. I have a good vocabulary. I can spell very, very well. I can communicate, I think, pretty well. And I got to attribute every ounce of that ability, not to some natural God-given ability. I attribute it to the fact that I read. I never went to college. I dropped out of high school. I went and got my GED because my parents said, if you're going to drop out of high school, you get your GED, or by the end of the summer, you're going back to school. I said, okay. And boom, I got my GED. Never had a day of college. I've met people who think I've got some kind of a master's or a bachelor's or a doctorate. I have none of that. I can articulate things. I can express ideas, concepts. I can hold my own in a conversation with, most people, most topics, most situations. I can't sit there and have a conversation with a bunch of nuclear engineers about the difference between a neuron and a proton, and the only thing I can interject is that Washington's full of morons. But the truth is that all of that is attributable to one thing: reading. The skill set that comes from that is so valuable to you. I cannot express to you with words why you should make reading a daily function in your life. I don't know what subjects you like. Some people, hey, listen, I don't care if it's a Western or if it's a science fiction book or if it's a drama or if it's a mystery or if it's a some kind of a thriller, a romance. Just read. Read, because that reading is changing your mind in a positive way. I'm not talking about reading the article in Playboy. I'm talking about reading a novel. I'm not talking about reading the cover of the local newspaper or the Wall Street Journal or the LA Times. I'm talking about reading a novel just purely for entertainment. Shut your television off. Turn off the radio. Give yourself some quiet time and force yourself to learn this skill, because it will pay you dividends that you will be stunned at the power and the importance of them. I promise you, at the end of a short period of time, you will start to see changes occur in your life, in your way of thinking, in your way of interacting with others, that will blow your mind. And ladies and gentlemen, isn't that really all we have? We have our minds. We have the ability to think creatively, constructively, destructively, if we allow ourselves to. But the one thing that separates us from the animals, the one thing that separates humanity, is our ability to think and reason, to weigh things, come to decisions and conclusions, formulate opinions. If you want to be a leader, and every one of you is, you just don't know it yet, the one tool that you have, the one thing that you can give yourself to make you a more effective leader is reading. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we're going to talk about critical thinking skills, and we're going to run through a little bit of an exercise here. And the topic is going to be the New York Times article on Benghazi. Make sure that you see our friends over at the Wits End Classic Barbershop on the square in West Plains, and the Patriot Cigar Shop right behind there. Their phone number is 257-1776. You can also find our friends over at the Battery Station at 257-7799 and thebatterystation.com. We'll be back in just a few moments. We're going to tackle that. I'm going to make sure that you have an opportunity to know what that phone number is for our new listen line coming shortly, too. I think you'll be very impressed with it. I know I am. We'll be back in just a moment. Weekend, the New York Times came out with an article which has got the thinking world stunned. They're actually supporting the arguments that were put forth by the administration in the very beginnings of this debacle about how Benghazi was motivated and created as a result of the video by that guy who, it didn't even matter what the video is, because the truth is what this really is an obvious, open, blatant attempt to manipulate and indoctrinate Americans with propaganda. And I want you to understand propaganda for what it is, and I want you to recognize it when you see it. And one of the only ways that you can really accomplish that task is by exercising your mind. Just like in the last segment we talked about, where you can exercise your mind by reading, you can exercise your critical thinking skills. It's called the Socratic way of thinking. And I would encourage you, if there's one thing I want you to read and study up on, it is the Socratic or the critical thinking methods of evaluating and analyzing information that comes to you so that you can identify that which is true, separate it from that which is misleading or indoctrination or propaganda in this case, and then formulate an opinion that belongs to you, that you have earned by doing your own homework. That's an extremely valuable tool, because as we slide further and further into our demise as a nation, you're going to see greater and greater weight and emphasis being placed on this issue of manipulating you via propaganda. And I mean now blatant, openly. We're not even hiding it anymore, okay? We're not talking about, a piece of, a little thing here and a little thing there. We're now talking about an all-out assault on America. Their article, titled "The Deadly Mix in Benghazi," goes back and attempts, and they published this on the 28th of December, and it's a long article, because their intention here is to mislead. And so they have to, spend a lot of time manipulating around the facts to try to ascertain and gather the type of thinking that they want you to follow. And the only way that you can realistically ever understand when you're being played, and I use that term because I grew up in the East Coast. I grew up in New Jersey. But I misspent a significant portion of my youth in Manhattan. We were young fellas, and we were always looking for excitement and thrills and sometimes trouble. And we would go to New York because I lived so close. I could make New York in less than an hour. I mean, most people wouldn't think twice about driving an hour to do something today. And so we were kids, we'd drive into Manhattan and, we'd get ourselves some beer or whatever it was that we were doing. And, we'd go to different things. And, I mean, sometimes it was just, listen, I can't tell you how many times I've been to the museums in New York. And that wasn't, trouble. That was just looking for things to do. I mean, But there were many times when, we saw the seedier side of life, if you will. And, you'd go to a park or Central Park or Washington Square Park or places like that, or the Bowery, and you would see people who made their living playing others. They were con men and scam artists and you could see them. They would eye you up, and they would try to determine and decipher how gullible is this guy or girl. You'd go to the bus station, and you'd see people literally there preying on people getting off the buses. Whether it was a young girl who looked like she might be a runaway, and they could get her and drag her into a life of prostitution or drug use, or whether it was a farm boy who got off the bus and just standing around looking around at, the rule in New York was you don't look up at the buildings because New Yorkers don't look up. And this guy would get off and he'd stand there in abject wonder and staring around at this, the sights and the sounds and the smells of the city. And man, these people were adept at preying on people like that. And they'd go up there and, hey, let me help you with your luggage, bro. And gullible, he'd say, okay. And the next thing you know, somebody else would distract him, and boom, the guy is gone with all his luggage and all his money and all of his stuff. I mean, there was a whole, I don't want to call it an industry, but it was, you could see it everywhere. You know, the guy on the street who's playing the shell game and, drop $20 down and, and you see somebody win and you're like, oh, I got to be able to do that. And you drop down $20 and boom, 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 boom. He grabs that 20 and says, wow, let's, throw up 10 more and I'll give you 20 back if you win. And you throw up another 10 and, after you've lost enough money, you walk away because you realize there's just no way to win. You see, there's no difference in the way that you are being fed government-sponsored propaganda. And the intent of that is to play you, to get something from you. The something they want from you is your obedience, your acquiescence, your non-action. They want your apathy to rise to the surface. They want your doubt. They want you to believe everybody around you is a conspiracy theorist and the tinfoil hats are in vogue. They want you to believe that what they offer you is ease, comfort, a safety net, help in times of trouble. And if only you will allow the nanny to just hold you and comfort you and provide for you, everything will be all right. Well, I'm here to tell you that that kind of thinking is been the destruction of many Americans. It's the destruction at this point of entire races. When we talk about I talked about in the second segment here, where we talked about how the Democratic Party pays Hispanics and blacks 70% less, or 70% on the dollar against what they pay white counterparts in working for their parties. I mean, you got to be kidding me, right? This is the group that tells you, that the Republicans are all for demonizing and pushing down the black man, and the blacks come out and say, "Man, I'm fighting against the man." The man is the Democratic Party, the same party who tells you they're helping you while they are playing you, and they are no different than the guy who stands there on the side of the street with the 3 shells and a little red ball. They're draining you of your resources, your emotion, your ability to fight. And if you do not exercise, understand, and recognize what is happening around you and what you are being fed, you will never know that you are being led into danger. Like the kid who gets off, like the girl who gets off the bus, and she is a runaway. And an astute observer who is, frankly, a viper, who's preying upon that girl, sees her and recognizes exactly who she is and what she is. Little girl from the country comes here to the big city to try to make her launch. She's running away from maybe an abusive home or whatever. And he says, well, I got a place you can stay. And she follows, never to return. If you're following the viper, and you don't realize that you're being led astray, you're blind in your ignorance. And I said it earlier, naivete is not a virtue. Now, the evidence that the New York Times article is completely fabricated is everywhere. The idea that this video was responsible from Benghazi, I mean, even the administration has admitted that that wasn't true. And yet the New York Times is going to continue to try to manipulate and prey upon their readers and get them to believe a fallacy. And unless someone, or unless they see another source that changes their way of thinking, they can be led into a den or a lair where they may never return. So take the analogy of the young girl. She gets off the bus and the pimp is playing her and saying, come on, I got to take care of you. I got a place you can stay. There's a bunch of other girls there, I give them a place to stay until they can get on their feet. And I can remember there used to be posters and stuff up, about that. But they didn't heed it. I remember one time I was driving in New York, and this guy was trying to sell this box, and it was a video camera, and it was sealed in plastic, and you couldn't have told the difference. I mean, it looked just like a video camera, and he was offering it cheap. And, when you've lived in a place like that where people try to prey on you, you generally get to the point where you no longer listen to, you don't, when somebody approaches you like that thinking you're the easy mark, you know how to handle that. And I could see people going over, and this one guy he's talking to and he's trying to pitch him the camera, and there's another guy standing behind him. And he's shaking his head so that the guy who is the mark can see him saying, don't do that. You're being played. Still the guy handed him the money. Opened up the box, there was rocks in there. You have to be willing to see truth when it's shown to you, when it's given to you, when it's apparent, when it's evident. You have to be willing to look at all the evidence around you. Now, there's an article that in the New York in the Fox News that counteracts this, and I've given you a list on in the postings this morning of half a dozen of them from many media sources, not conservative. Huffington Post. I mean, you can't get more liberal than the Huffington Post except for the New York Times. Completely false. Sources on the ground in Benghazi are challenging the New York Times report. New York Times report published over the weekend angers sources who were on the ground that night. These sources, who continue to face threats of losing their jobs, sharply challenged the Times' findings that there was no involvement from al-Qaeda or any other international terror group, and that an anti-Islam film played a role in inciting the initial waves of attack. House Intelligence Organization comes out and says, sorry, that's not how it happened at all. Mike Rogers, he sits on the committee that reviewed all of the information. He says, New York Times Benghazi report is, quote, just not accurate. And he's the House Intelligence Chairman. I mean, this guy has security clearance that he hears all the dirt. He knows every little secret that's going on. There's a lot of things I don't like about Mike Rogers. But for him to come out and say, the New York Times is lying to you, well, he was asked by Mike Wallace in an interview, well, what did they get wrong in their article? And he said, well, Al-Qaeda was not involved in this. There was some level of pre-planning, we know that. There was an aspiration to conduct an attack by al-Qaeda and their affiliates in Libya. We know that. The individuals on the ground talked about a planned tactical movement on the compound. This is the compound before they went to the annex. All of that would directly contradict what the New York Times definitively says was an exhaustive investigation that ultimately comes back to the same conclusion that Obama now admits he lied about, which was that it was all about a video. What I'm trying to express to you here is that this is not necessarily the issue of Benghazi. You've heard me talk about Benghazi 100 times. We know that Benghazi was not only a tragedy, it was a criminal malfeasance on the part of this administration, and it was criminal activity in an attempt to cover up a gun running scandal. Not Fast and Furious, but a whole new level. What I want you to use this information for, and this story from the New York Times and the opposing stories that I've linked to it, so that you have the ability to read and understand how, and I want you to read it, though, with a critical eye. I don't want you to just read it and in a normal way. I want you to read between the lines. And I want you to see when the pitch is made. I want you to see when the Viper throws out the enticing offer. I want you to see for yourself how words can be used to manipulate your way of thinking. And then I want you to take that knowledge that you've gathered and gained, and I want you to look at everything going forward that crosses your path and use that same skill set that you've just sharpened and honed to evaluate everything that comes across to you. Sometimes, in using critical thinking skills, we have to challenge our own bias. Don't tell me you don't have one. I know you do. But part of generating and earning a clear thinking process is challenging our own bias. I have them. You have them. We all do. It's impossible to be a human being and not have them. Those who would argue that I am impartial are liars. You have an opinion. You've already formulated it. You have a bias. Your job is to identify where your bias is and determine whether or not you're drinking your own Kool-Aid or you've done enough homework and investigation to determine your own erroneous assumptions and correct them. See, critical thinking sometimes is painful because we identify things in ourselves that we say, I don't want to agree with that, but I have to. That sometimes can be a very painful exercise for people to go through. But I got to tell you, once you've determined that you can be in the wrong and you've identified how and where and when and it's easier to do going forward, and it's easier to recognize those individual faults within yourself that have brought you to that concern or problem. It's easier to identify those mistakes when you make them, because you start to recognize them in yourself. You know, being open-minded is not a bad thing. You know, these people who say, well, you know, I'm all for liberty. I'm all for freedom. But You can't do this and you can't do that. And, well, stop right there. What you just said to me and the following thing you said to me shows me that you truly do not believe in liberty and freedom. You believe in liberty and freedom as long as I do it under your approved methods. Watch those people, because in the words of H.L. Mencken, the urge to save humanity is almost always an urge to rule. And there's lots of people out there that want to save humanity. Your job is to be able to critically think your way through those challenges and identify who and what is what. And I'm going to tell you something, and I'm going to say some stuff that I'm going to get a ton of email about negatively. This includes the politicians that you're going to be evaluating this coming season. But it also includes those people that you have put your trust in the past. Your family, your minister, or your pastor. I'm not saying you need to challenge your religious beliefs. Although even Jesus told us to look and challenge our beliefs. But I am talking about whether or not your pastor is doing a good job shepherding your flock. I know every time I talk about 501c3, I get a boatload of emails saying, you're just trying to undermine the church. No, I'm not. I'm trying to point out the fact that the church has undermined itself, and they have betrayed and sold themselves down for 30 pieces of silver. Because of this little thing called a 501c3 that keeps them tax exempt. And so they staunch their free flow of speech and what they should be talking about because they allow themselves to be indoctrinated and not talk about these topics on Sunday morning. Instead, it's all about how wonderful and light and be enlightened and be brightened. And if that's your church, and all they talk about is grace and God's going to come and save you, or the concept that if you do this, you're going to get that, God's going to enrich and empower you, you're being lied to. You're being played. You're being played just like the pimp on the street, or the guy with the 3 balls in the clamshells, or the walnut shells, or just like the politician. You're just being played by a guy who's carrying a Bible around as his justification. Discerning truth from fiction doesn't just run in the political realm. It covers those people who you trust the most. Because they're the ones who have the most to gain from you. You've been listening to America's Voice Now. We're going to wrap our show for the day. Please join us on our website at americasvoicenow.org. Please find us on Facebook at facebook.com/America's Voice Now. Join us at youtube.com/America's Voice Now. And on our new patriotfb.com, where you can catch this show streaming live every day along with a host of other great Patriot radio programs. It's patriotfb.com. We'll see you tomorrow morning bright and early, and then New Year's Day I'm taking the day off. Have a great day. God bless.